everyone, and welcome to our YouTube channel, Moneyline with Nancy at TV. In case you're not a subscriber yet, please do subscribe. Just press the subscribe button as well as turn on the notification bell so that you can get notifications when we upload our videos. Don't also forget to subscribe and join, follow, like our other social media platforms. Of course, you're seeing it right about now. Don't also forget to share this video across your platforms. Enjoy the video. Welcome back to Moneyline with Nancy. Of course, like I mentioned earlier on, this morning we're digging into a headline topic that affects all of us, from salary earners to CEOs, digital traders, even to landlords. The topic, of course, is decoding Nigeria's new tax laws, what households, businesses, and investors must know. And joining me now are two brilliant minds to help us shred this topic. Esiri Agbeyi is a tax partner at PwC Nigeria. Welcome to you, Esiri, and Dr. Paul Alaje, Chief Economist at SPM Professionals. Thank you both for joining me. Good morning.
Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning,
Dr. Agbeyi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Esiri, good to see you. Quite a long time. So I think let me be a bit biased and start with you. Explain to us, or explain to those watching right now, what has just happened. The president has signed the tax laws. Of course, he has signed the tax bills into laws. In the last few days, that's really been the biggest economic story, I must tell you. What is fundamentally new in those laws, and what exactly has changed in plain terms? And I would appreciate that we take short answers so that we can, take a look at many issues here. Go ahead, Esiri.
Yeah, so thanks, Nancy. I think the big change is we've not had such a significant overhaul of our tax acts in years. So this is the first of its kind. Not only that, we are consolidating quite a number of tax acts that previous to now had been done in isolatory manner. So consolidating that means that further to this, amendments to the law would be taken holistically as opposed to it happening not coordinately. The third thing is we've done this in record time. So this bill has become an act in 2 years. If you compare that with the petroleum industry bill, which took like 20 years to become an act, I think this is record breaking. What it then means is, in terms of the impact, foreign investors are more likely to be certain about the tax treatment of items. And so that definitely does not put a stop to the investments that could come into Nigeria, as we had seen with the oil and gas industry when the petroleum industry bill had not been enacted. The last point I think to make is, or maybe two more points, is the fact that it's a lot more progressive because it takes into mind a bigger vulnerable population and exemptions that are needed to forestall some of the big shocks we had from the foreign exchange unification, amongst others. And lastly is also the gear towards transparency, a lot more transparency and accountability with the centralization of administration of the tax authorities in the Nigerian Tax Administration Act. So maybe I'll stop there, but those are some of the key highlights coming through for me.
Yes, we'll dig a bit deeper into it as we go on. But Dr. Alaje, let me come to you. What does this tax laws, this new tax laws, what does this signal about Tinubu's administration economic philosophy in a nutshell? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Beautiful morning to you, my colleague that joined in via Zoom, and the rest of the world, people watching us all over the world now, and those that will watch in the future. So for me, when you look at what Nigeria did in 2024, our debt service to revenue, our revenue was far below our debt service. When you combine domestic and external together, our revenue is not significant enough. Therefore, we need to do something about our sources of revenue. One of those sources is taxes. Perhaps I haven't looked at that. You recall that before President Tinubu, we were spending 98% of our revenue to service debts. That has reduced to between 67 to 70%. About 67, 68% is what we are doing now. But that is still really very significant. What we should do, therefore, is to perhaps rejig our revenue system. Before now, the expectation is tax bill. It hopes that we're going to be doing 18% tax to GDP. This
Okay, seems the network is really
tax
freezing.
is
Okay,
particularly
okay, I can
interesting
hear
to
Paul
me and
now.
professionals to bridge the gap impact. Okay, to bridge the impact, to bridge the gap between what professionals think and what the people think. So one of the highlights for me is that households that are poor are exempted to a large extent. Small businesses, there is now definition is clearly defined that small businesses will not need to pay, especially those that are doing below 50 million naira, even though it's still compulsory for them to file. Another one out there is how much should be paid and how much is too much. I saw your in the interview you had with a citizen, somebody had mentioned that individual earning below 250,000 we don't need to pay. I think what that meant is for the household. An household in Economist is assumed to be more than one
One
person.
person.
Maybe combining what husband and wife is doing together, they might not need to pay this below 250,000 naira a month. And the most important thing to me is where I make my contribution, even to the assembly issue of VAT. You recall that it's been proposed to increase to about 12.5% and later to about 15%. But we wrote that, yes, we support the tax bill, but for it to become law, it's important we retain 7.5% because of its macroeconomic 5%. We measure the impact of this on inflation and people's ability to pay and the necessary changes, then we can talk about increasing VAT. By and large, I tell you, like I said, some of the concerns and reservations I have making the reservation to be 60%. We felt that should be 30%. I'm happy that the both chambers of assembly adopted that it remained 30% after we've shared our recommendation with them. And these are key things that I think are in and good for Nigeria. And I think it's a new era for Nigeria because very soon we'll be hearing what will be trending. You know, this tax bill is not yet implemented. What will be trending is fiscalization and digital processing. It's going to be a different thing from what we used to know. And I can tell you, 2026, one of the things that will dominate business headline will be taxes and taxes and taxes. Just wait until we get there.
That I definitely know, and that is why this conversation is still on, because I also do understand that, a lot of people, there's also been a lot of misinformation around this. But very quickly, Paul, in just 10 seconds, what kind of model do you think that, Tinubu's philosophy on taxes or his economy is? Do you think that the Taiwo Yedele Committee mirrored, for example, the UK tax system, whereby anything you make in the UK will almost drown you to death? Or even in the US, where the government will still tax you, but they will still ensure that they put money in your hands. Taiwo Yedele told me last week here on the show that they looked at different models. They went to Rwanda, they went to France, they looked at France model. But what kind of model do you think is being adopted now, very quickly?
I think it's a little here and a little there. Because to adopt the American model, it means that government needs to do more in terms of investing in the economy. When you use one of the narrow examples, which I can say the Nigerian budget, you see that we are still doing far less than 35% of the entire budget in the hands of the people, either as recurrent or for capital expenditure. We are still doing far below that. But in the UK, anything you earn, you get. So now the rich will have to pay more. Once you earn above 50 million naira, you have to pay 25% after necessary deductions have been made as your taxes. While the poor is from 80 or if you like 100,000 naira. But the real sense of it, what is the capacity to buy for that? So it's not purely American system. It's not purely the UK system. I think it's a combination of those, combination of the models that Nigeria will now be adopting. I think what will make a whole lot of difference is what is applicable in the Middle East, where most of the tax system is purely digitalized, and I think this is what this policy or these laws will mirror from 2026 going forward.
Okay, for Esiri, the government says that, can I say Esiri? The government says that this policy or these laws rather will simplify taxes and reduce overlap. I would want you to comment from the compliance point of view. Is life really going to be easier for taxpayers? Let's really say that, let's really break it down. This question is for Esiri. If life is really going to be easier for taxpayers, for the average salary earner watching me right now, or a small business owner watching this program, in what way do you think that they will understand the taxes that they owe? This question is for Esiri.
Yeah. So thanks, Nancy. I think there are a number of ways that the government has sought to do this, which one of which is also looking at additional translations for the Tax Act so that it's widely available to the masses in languages that we can understand, but also having jingles that make it easy for individuals to understand. So definitely a lot is required in terms of communication to even make people aware of what the laws entail. But another thing that's also worth noting is in the Nigeria Tax Administration Act, as well as the Joint Board Revenue Act, we do have room for a tax ombuds office that is supposed to liaise with the tax authorities on behalf of taxpayers and serve as an independent arbiter. So to the extent that there are issues with some of the assessments that tax authorities would raise, which usually is cause for concern for taxpayers, because sometimes you get tax assessments, you don't understand them, they might be excessive, you don't understand what your rights are, and to what extent you can even object to those, especially if there are no funds to do so. So it's quite expensive then to comply. The Tax Ombuds Office is supposed to be that media or mediator between the taxpayers and the tax authorities. And they are supposed to also resolve complaints relating to taxes, levies, duties, or other regulatory charges. The other thing we see is that the administration is going to be a lot more centralized, where data is now shared between the federal Nigeria Revenue Service, no longer FRS, and the state tax authorities who would have more autonomy as well, so that that data can be used to plug gaps that have before now resulted to multiple taxation or communicating with taxpayers in a way like there's no face to that individual. So you're, for instance, receiving assessments from the FRS and the state, and there might be conflicts as well in the data that's been used to raise those assessments. Having a more centralized system definitely can plug that gap. A lot will definitely depend on how this is implemented going forward, what kind of technology the authorities would roll out to do so that, we have technology enabling what is anticipated under the Act. The other thing as well is in terms of the formalization of the sector. And I think this is a bigger advantage for us as an economy than something that's directly related to the individuals. Because if the economy does well, then we wouldn't have some of the setbacks that we've seen at the individual level. One of the things is the move to start having businesses a lot more formalized so that their taxes are paid at that level. And you see that very clearly with some of the streamlining in taxes, where there's no advantage really to then be informalized and then still have to pay the same taxes as the corporates would pay. So those streamlinings will ensure that most of our economy is formalized. Taxes are collected in a very centralized bucket, and hopefully the tax revenues that we then will collect will be significantly higher than what we had before. That provides significant cushion to individuals and to the economy in terms of what we spend, the inflation rate, and even the interest on borrowings as well.
Esiri, let me still sit with you a bit. One of the new laws affect how I will say capital gains tax, yes, to expand into digital assets such as crypto assets. What does it mean for young Nigerians trading online?
Yeah, I think for that one in particular, the individuals who trade online can expect that the tax authorities are now very interested in what's going on in that space. And they would have to definitely start filing tax returns on transactions that have given rise to gains in that space, but also know the rules around how you can take advantage of deductions such as losses made. The big part of the conversation is even understanding who those transactions are made in, whose names they are made in, knowing also how to value those assets, for instance, in order to give rise to either the tax benefits or even assess the taxes on the one hand. So there is a lot of learning that would be required from the tax authorities side to ensure that we don't get into that space where there's a lot more disputes than benefits in collecting taxes from that space. And the reason it's important to focus on that area is the economies are very fast becoming digitalized, and virtual currencies, virtual assets are fast taking space in the economies as we know it. It would be wrong and it would be a disservice to our economy not to focus on that area as well. But what's important is to ensure that we also understand the mechanics behind how those currencies operate. We can easily exclude the capital base as well from the revenues that are made from the capital base, because it's one thing to store your assets in those currencies and make a gain. It's another thing to use those assets for trading. And so one has to be able to make a distinction between the two as well to ensure we're not taxing capital. It
Capital.
really has to be the gains. The other thing is also plug into those exchanges where those transactions are made. How easy will it be for the tax authorities to have those
Exactly.
information? A lot of agreements will need to be signed with other countries so they can have access to that information. And it's something that had started before now with the Common Reporting Standard, where Nigeria can sign up to receiving information from other jurisdictions as well, where these trade exchanges are operating from. So a lot would need to happen. There's a lot more complexity than what I've described now, but I think time will tell in terms of how we transit into this new era, what amount of time is required for both parties to understand what's required on both sides, and hopefully we get to a point where we don't have as much disputes as we imagine from this sector.
It's good that you raised that because I was about to ask that question. If indeed the tax authority would have that wherewithal to be able to monitor those transactions digitally. But it was good that you really explained that. So that means a lot of work needs to be done. Let me move over to Dr. Alaje, still on the same topic, which I'm talking about. A lot of Nigerians are trading in crypto, digital assets. Is Dr. Alaje there? In digital services,
Yes.
yes, content creation. Will this new tax laws, do you see it discouraging innovation and entrepreneurship? Or do you think that we will get it as easy as Esiri mentioned earlier on?
Well, I think that this tax law will help to formalize that sector. To a large extent, a lot of activity has been going on there. I recall that I think last year or 2 years ago, the NSA had made an announcement regarding one of the factors that is responsible for the unnecessary demand for US dollar in Nigeria. And I think it was Binance director that was arrested or invited at a time before the release the underworld, but it's not really giving Nigeria revenue. The good news is that Security and Exchange Commission seems to have a policy that captured this already. But I think if tax office and Security and Exchange Commission work hand in hand to guarantee that those that are doing businesses, their gains are taxed, their profits are taxed, and not the capital that they have invested directly. But tax, as good as it is, sometimes may act as the disincentive. That is why we now need to do the marginal propensity or marginal propensity to pay as taxes. So if marginal propensity to pay as taxes forms the burden, then we should know that the rate particularly might not be good, as it may discourage many people. The truth is that those who are creating content today, we've watched their content, we have also heard what they mentioned regarding revenues that comes to them by sharing content by those likes, by uploading those dollars. It might just be good as an economy if our authorities can become more savvy, more trained, and have the wherewithal and the technology that is required to plug revenue from those. The truth is that this is just the beginning. The real work starts from now. And when I say from now, I'm saying that we don't need to wait till 1st of January 2026 before we start the work. What we have available in terms of technology with tax authority right now is not sufficient. So if government wants to earn more, it must be willing to pay more in revenues. It must be willing to pay, on training, it must be willing to pay more for technological deployment, and it must be willing to pay more in implementation. These are things that can guarantee the kind of future we want to have, more revenue, so that, remember the way I started, the burden of of debts and debt services for 2023, 2024, and perhaps 2025 may be even higher until we generate more and we're able to lessen the burden on our population and on our people.
Dr. Alaje, still with you. How do you think that this would impact inflation moving forward? Our inflation double digits. We have zero VAT now on essentials like food, education, and all the other things. Do you think that this will definitely impact household consumption as well as inflation? Yes.
We've always had zero VAT on food. This is not the first time we're having zero VAT on food. We've always had zero VAT on food. At least if you read Finance Act, I think 2020 or 2021, food was VAT exempt. And so I think that if there will be impact on inflation, what may lead to a sporadic impact on inflation is the VAT had been increased. And said resist every temptation to increase VAT. More so, the federal government share of VAT has reduced to 10%, and that of local government is 35%. State takes the lion's share. So, as a matter of fact, VAT
Okay, it seems that
is a state tax, and they're getting people can induce or spark inflation 7.5%. 7.5%.
Oh, okay. Paul, you're
is okay. So I'm not really foreseeing now. The things that are, for instance, inflation might go up in the coming period, even though we've seen 3 consecutive reduction, but we might see a spike because of crisis going on in Plateau and Benue, 2 key states that help produce food. And when food inflation goes up, be sure that you have its impact on headline inflation.
For Esiri, many Nigerians run side hustles. This question is for Esiri. Like I mentioned earlier, I've said it on this program a few times that we also run what I call a hustle economy. Everybody in Nigeria is a hustler. You know, when you meet people, how far now are they manage? What do they do? I just a hustle now. Do you think that these new tax laws are also bringing in freelancers, the hustlers, into more tax scrutiny, as it were? Esiri, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Yes.
So I'll answer that question, but just to add to what the previous speaker had said on VAT and them being zero rated, what we had was that they were exempt from VAT, which is quite different from zero rating. Zero rating means that you apply the zero rate, but then you also recover the input VAT on your cost base, which is significant. So what we didn't have before was we would say it's exempt, the goods are exempt, and so any business that produces those basic food items or the medical supplies does not charge VAT, but they suffer VAT on their own supplies or their own inputs or purchases. Those cannot be recovered. But with a zero VAT system, you can recover that VAT, which I think is impressive and also aligns with what we see internationally. To the question on hustling, I think there is an incentive here for some of our hustlers, especially with the fact that the PIT rate is a lot more progressive. And by PIT, we mean the personal income tax rate. So there is a higher band now that's supposed to be exempt from taxes at 0%. So it's about 800,000 per annum that's exempt. I think that's a very good incentive for some of our youths who hustle, because when you look at the data as well, you only have a very large, you have a very higher percentage of our population that are earning below that bracket. In fact, the last data I saw was that about 10% of our people earn about 100,000 per annum. So that's a lot of workers that are under that radar that before now would have paid taxes at say 7%, but now are being exempted. The other thing is the fact that VAT rules for recovery have changed. Before now, you couldn't recover VAT on your purchases except you were a manufacturer of goods. So if you provided services, which is what most of our youths are inclined to do, where you have a lot of influencers online, you have a lot of people who are probably providing makeup services or artists, those services are now within the bracket of VAT recovery. Before now, it could only be that you manufactured a good and then you could recover the VAT on your purchases. But say, for instance, a makeup artist who is hustling, all those products that you bought, the makeup products you bought that, VAT had been charged on. Once you issue your invoice for VAT to a customer, you can take the VAT on those purchases and offset it against the VAT you would charge on the service fee. So that's a significant milestone change from what we had before. And I think to a very large extent, not only would we see a lot of our businesses formalized, but what you now see is there's a lot more relief that's provided to those who are in that hustling bracket. The third point to note is also the relief, the kind of relief that's being given. We used to have something called a consolidated relief before that you can get on the income that you are taxed on. I know that there will be a lot of outcry in terms of that consolidated relief being removed. But what we've seen it replaced with is something that's more targeted at productivity. So if you paid rent, for instance, you can get a percentage off of that rent as your relief. What it does for the government and what it does for individuals are twofold. For the individuals, you get a relief that's closely targeted to your rent, but you get an incentive to disclose about the landlords where that rent has been collected from. This is one creative way that the laws are looking to expand our tax brackets so that landlords, for instance, who had not been in that tax bracket and it had been difficult to get data on, you can very easily get that data just throwing one stone or two birds.
But Esiri, let me just also dwell on this landlord since you brought it up. Landlords, tenant, property sellers, how they will be affected since we now have tighter capital gains tax. How will they be affected?
Yes, so how they'll be affected is the arbitrage that you had before now to remain as someone who only earned income, to redescribe your gains, for instance, on the disposal of those assets as income and then pay a lower tax rate is pretty much gone. Because prior to now, you had a capital gains tax rate at 10%, then you had companies being taxed at 30%, and then you had individuals or unincorporated businesses being taxed at the personal income tax rate, which a top band of about 24%. It means that for a landlord, if you had any rent, you'd have to tax it at the 24% band. But if you decided to dispose of that asset because it's a capital item, before now you would have paid 10% on the gains, yeah? And so you could easily just do away with that and say, I'd report the 10%. But now that we've aligned the rates together, it means that you don't have any advantage in saying that it is a capital gain or it is an income, because both will be taxed at the same rate. So you pay tax at the same rate to the government. Prior to now, what you'd also find is that landlords generally would push those taxes to the tenants because they would say you'd have to pay the amounts net of taxes to me. And the only way the tenants could push back was to say, okay, the withholding tax that I would have deducted, that's fine, I'll pay that as an additional amount to the rent. But now landlords have to basically file returns, and then the landlord doesn't file a return because, the tenant is basically taking up that cost. But now you have to file returns on basically everything, the income streams, the capital gain stream, and you file them at the same rate. So one, it's easier for you because you don't have to double your hats thinking about two different taxes, but it's also better for us as an economy because then you're not cheating the tenants in in support of the landlord. So I think there's some alignment that we have there.
Okay, for Dr. Alaje, we've often debated revenue versus reforms. Do you think that these tax laws are a revenue drive in disguise? This question is for Dr. Alaje, or perhaps a deeper attempt at systems correction. Let me also add this question. If indeed you see these changes from those tax laws as pro-growth, do you think that perhaps the government now will begin to earn more revenue from the non-oil sector side?
Okay, so let me start with the second. Definitely, I'm expecting more revenue to go to government because these tax laws has helped government to expand or to widen the tax bracket. A number of bracket, and the system we bring a lot of informal business for and individuals that are not captured to come into the system because of a digital process, which I suppose will be seeing from 2026. So definitely this is more revenue for government, which of course in my opening remarks, I say we need much of this to reduce to have more in order to service our debt instead of going to borrow more money to do that. Now, your first question has to be, is this really a reform, a revenue drive? I think we are on both. We're on both because it's a reform, and the reform is perhaps to help us adjust our system, to put structure in place, to formalize the process, to make our tax system to be more modern, to be more globally compliant, even though it's not they are not perfect bills, perfect laws. They can still be corrected, I strongly believe, but to a large extent, they are good bills or they are good laws that we have already. But it's also majorly a revenue drive, which I think will help boost what goes to the federation in terms of revenue. So it satisfies both legs.
Okay.
Revenue-wise, I think it satisfies it, and it's also a reform as it has been presented.
How do you think that these reforms would empower subnationals? Do you think, yes, how do you think it will further empower states?
Definitely, state already got 5% in terms of VAT. States will now be able to share data with the federal government. For instance, I give you an instance. Somebody in Onitsha wants to buy a property, and the person say, "Well, I live in Abuja. I already pay taxes," and he brings the document. Whether it's original or not, nobody knows. But under this new regime, data is shared. If you said you have paid in the FCT, you live in the FCT, we can check what you pay in the FCT. We can authenticate what you've paid in the FCT. Now to say that, yes, you may not necessarily need to pay to live in the GRA in Oka or wherever part you want to live in Anambra State. So, but the good news here is that it also pays the person, because some states would say whatever you have paid to the FCT, then go and get your property in the FCT. You don't have to come to Anambra to buy property. So, but the good news is, if you have paid in the FCT, the data is shared, and subnational can now see definitely this person has not paid. More revenue goes to them, and also to the federation. Everybody can benefit with the new system, and it also, of course, helps with transparency across board, not just the state, even at local level. Everybody can hear. Then what comes in and what is being shared, what is being declared, can unanimously be monitored, not just by what the federal government is saying they generated, because they have also access to the system. They know what has accrued, what gets to them, and what the component that will be going to the remaining part of the federation.
Okay.
I think what we need to pay careful attention to is what will happen to the respective state revenue boards, which of course have their own institution, have their own system. Here, the act stems to accommodate them, but there is still some level of ambiguity, which I think should be cleared, and so that the harmonization will be seamless, and we can have a progressive approach to improving to improving our tax administration and the tax law generally in Nigeria.
Okay, for Esiri, tax ID is now mandatory for financial transactions. What practical compliance hurdles do you think that individuals or even businesses will face here? That's one. The second question to you is that there is now an introduction of a development levy. The law mandates that except small companies, by the way, they will now pay a 4% development levy of the accessible profits. That is tax. You are talking about development levy consolidates I think the tertiary education tax, information technology, NASENI, and police trust fund levy. Don't you think that this will also be a strain on big companies moving forward? So two questions: tax ID mandatory, how that would impact individuals and companies, as well as the introduction of this development levy. Because there seems with this development levy, there seems to be a consolidation of everything into one.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the ID system, already we have existing IDs that either the FRS or the states
Is that
have
not the TIN
gone.
number? The TIN?
Yeah, that's your TIN, the tax
Yeah,
identification
but is this
number.
tax ID not going to be different from that?
Yeah, so there'll be a consolidation now, especially seeing that systems have to be consolidated across all these authorities and maybe a reissuance of those IDs. But time will tell, because I expect that the Nigeria Revenue Service will come out with rules on those in the next 6 months. And most of these laws, which we have now in the Nigerian Tax Act and all the other accompanying acts, really will depend on the efficiency of the transformation that goes on in the next 6 months. The good thing is that the law does not take effect until January, hopefully, when we see the signed version, but that's the expectation, that it will only take effect in January. So we should be ramping up a lot of efforts in ensuring that there aren't any practical challenges between now and the end of the year.
Okay.
And then even when we do get to the end of the year, we should have a fall gap or a safe gap measure that says this was your old TIN and this is the new ID, so that there continues to be a platform where they speak to each other and you don't lose all of the data that you had previously submitted under an old ID system.
Okay.
That's the one. In terms of the development levy, what this is about is just a consolidation of several taxes. So again, one of the big ambitions of this reform was to ensure that we didn't have as many taxes as we used to have before. When we looked at the list of approved taxes, we had basically over 60 taxes that either individuals or businesses had to comply with. And most of the time, it just adds unnecessarily to the compliance cost. So what this has done is collapsed all of those taxes into one development levy. It's basically the same rates, just added
everything to
vertically
make it
to
4%.
arrive at your 4%.
4%.
Yeah.
Okay, just as we close, Esiri, I'll come to Dr. Alaje in a bit. What biggest mistakes do you think that businesses and individuals should avoid now as we go into this new tax framework? And what are the key actions that you think individuals and businesses should take right now as we move also into this new tax framework come January 1, 2026? In less than 1 minute, if you can.
Yeah, I think the big thing is even understanding where those changes have come from. I know the focus for this discussion has really been on individuals and smaller businesses, but there are bigger changes that have come through from the Act. Some of them include the minimum taxes that will now apply to align with what's going on at the OECD level, where the OECD has proposed a global minimum tax for multinational companies of a certain level. This is something that we've adopted in the Nigerian tax law, and businesses definitely need to understand how this impacts their business in Nigeria, but also the businesses of their subsidiaries in other jurisdictions. Two is in terms of the way individuals are defined as being resident in the country, it's now very clearly done. And it's important that HR personnel, payroll personnel, finance directors also understand what this means for their employees, and they can change their systems to basically align. There's a big move now to making sure that we're submitting or filing our VAT on a real-time basis with the VAT fiscalization that has been proposed, which means that businesses as well as individuals who do business must get those VAT fiscal devices and basically train their systems to plug into those. So I think those are changes that they need to understand and basically plan for a transformation of their systems and processes to align with what the authorities will also be bringing out.
Okay. Dr. Alaje, final question for you, and I'll appreciate if we can do this in just a few seconds. Public trust is definitely key. Do you think that Nigeria can truly grow hard tax revenue without first fixing how government spends and how it delivers services? Then the second argument also is that, okay, we're having new tax laws, but how many companies do we have in Nigeria? The ecosystem is mainly made up of small businesses. We've seen a lot of big businesses collapsing, shutting down. So how do you put that? Should we put the cart before the horse first? Very quickly in a few seconds.
Okay, so Nigeria, I'm sure, especially civil society, will beam their light on government expenditure. Excessive spendings will be, of course, will be called out by the civil society and, of course, many Nigerians. If government is making more, you have to demonstrate that for people to pay more, we are plugging it back into system, especially in the area of security, education, health, infrastructure, and energy. These are key sectors that people expect to see improvement. And people will be very quick to remind government that when we're asked to pay more in energy, we have not seen major significant difference in the area of energy. But I believe that tax authorities have done their part. How government spend, it's a different conversation entirely. Talking about businesses,
I think we'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to you both, Esiri. Friend, it shouldn't be this long before we talk, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you, absolutely, Nancy, and well done.
Thank you very much. Dr. Alaje, thank you also for joining us today.
Thank you so very much for having us. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Esiri Agbeyi, a partner, that's tax partner at PwC Nigeria, and Dr. Paul Alaje, Chief Economist at SPM Professionals, and we've been looking at this new tax laws, the impact on households, businesses, and in fact, what you need to know. And I hope that we'll be able to advance that conversation a little bit more on the station. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. Please join me again tomorrow. My team and I do have a fantastic day. I am Nancy Naji. Bye for now. Thank you for making it up to this minute watching the video. Thank you all. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Moneyline with Nancy TV. Like, follow all our other social media platforms where we keep you up to speed with fantastic interviews, as well as markets, personal finance, business, and economy information. This is the best place to be. I'll see you all again in the next video.